Hi, guys, and welcome to the 433 podcast. This is the first episode. I'm joined by my co host, Draps, who's going to be joining me hopefully for the rest of them if you can put up with me.
Don't hold your breath.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your footballing history? I guess that's how we probably should introduce ourselves, given it's episode 1.
21 long years of painful support for Aston Villa.
Wasn't it Birmingham, I thought?
That's off. Birmingham.
But yeah, so 100% Aston Villa, no flittering around with other teams.
No Blues, no West Brom, no Wolves. They're all horrible.
So you only lived in Wolves. It wasn't a sort of it wasn't out of choice.
I live right next to Molineux, actually. Yeah, I used to hear the games from my halls, but yes, it was very quiet. So
Yeah, it must have been pretty horrendous for you. So, well, Draps being the poor old Villa fan dealing with lots of hurt, I had a nice period of enjoying football for the first few years of my support, being an Arsenal fan, and then things over the last few years haven't quite been so rosy. Also, do
yeah,
like a little bit of the Green Army from my university days, but yeah, Arsenal are the team for me,
about
unfortunately.
4 teams, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I mean, Worthing FC, they're a big one. The Rebels actually got. I don't know if you saw recently, but they were doing a charity drive to do upgrades to the stadium and stuff. And
Yeah.
one of the bid things was to help out doing commentary for one of the games, which I have signed up for. So I'm sure we'll have some information on that coming soon.
Surprisingly, all right ground, Woodside Road.
Yeah, I've been there a
Level.
couple of times over the last season or so, and it's a really good day out. Apart from when Worthing lose, which seems to be 50-50. Although the league got cancelled this year, didn't it? Even though they
Yeah.
should have been promoted, which was a scam, really, given how well they did.
What
Hope,
they've been trying to do for years.
yeah, exactly. But hopefully they can push on. I don't know what tier are they in. Like, how far away from the sort of actual National League are they?
When I was a kid, they were always in Ryman. I think it was when it was sponsored by Ryman's, and I think they were always trying to get into the Ryman Premier. I don't know. It's about 4 leagues down from the conference.
Yeah, because they were playing Salford over maybe about 2 years ago, but I don't know if that was in some sort of like the FA Vars or whatever that was called,
If
or
they
if it's actual league games.
get out of their bit, there's like because they're in a north-south bit, aren't they? So it's only
Mm.
in. You've got to get out of that. Then it's the Premier for that. It's like another north-south league, and then
So there are ways to go, but yeah, hopefully with a bit of extra investment like they're getting now and doing so well this season, hopefully it is the signs of something good coming on. And I guess aside from that, the local team, which I know you're a big fan of, is Brighton.
thanks.
Well, we've been to a few games together, haven't we? You enjoyed every
Yeah,
second of it. The great Craig McHale-Smith game against, who was that? Sunderland.
yeah. It was Steve Bruce's Sunderland.
Yeah. Well, that was my first game at the Amex, and that must have been probably 2012ish.
Yes, it was the first. I think it was like the first cup game at the Amex or something, wasn't it?
Something like that. Carling Cup, I guess it would have been.
Yeah, first round, I think.
But yeah, no, that was a really good game, along with the nice walk that we had to do from the Amex all the way down to Brighton
Oh,
train station. And for those of you that have done it, realise how far that actually is.
didn't realise, did we?
No, I think it must have taken us. We probably had 45 minutes to make that journey.
Yeah,
Wasn't
had to
pretty.
run. Had
Yeah,
to run a lot of it.
was not pretty.
Didn't like it so much when we went to Brighton Villa, though, did you? When I celebrated when we scored.
Brighton Villa? Did we go to Brighton Villa?
Yeah, when we were in the Championship and we drew 1-1 there. We scored to go 1-0 up, and I inadvertently sort of
Oh
celebrated.
yeah, you did. Yeah,
Everybody.
that wasn't pretty.
Accident.
Easily done. That's the dangers of sitting in the home end. But yeah, now that you guys know a little bit about us and what we care about in football, I guess we'll get into today's main topic, which is talking about the Premier League Project Restart. I don't know, Draps, if you want to get into anything before we get into the meat of it in terms of your initial opinion.
Well, if it were up to me, I wouldn't bother with it personally. I would play the 2 games that need to be played, and I'd call it at 29 games.
So by the 2 games that need to be played, you're just saying what Liverpool do the fixtures that they need to do until they get the trophy and then forget it
No,
from there?
no, so there's two games. There's Arsenal against Manchester City, and then there's Aston Villa against Sheffield United. You play those two games, everybody's played 29 games,
Oh, okay. So
and
they're
then
games in the backlog.
I'd call it at 29 games played.
Well, that'd be nice to see us get another win before next season.
Good for Sky because the Villa Sheffield United game. I mean, that is Villa win, Villa stay up, which I don't expect us to do, but there you go. Sheffield United win, and they'd be fifth and would be in the Champions League qualifying stages.
What is that going to fifth place this season?
I assume so because City are second, aren't they? They can't
True.
finish outside the top four if you called it at 29 games.
But then
So
there's a question around that as to what's going on with that European ban as well. Is that
yeah,
going to
you've got
ever
yeah.
come into play? Or
Well,
has that
that's the
just been put
thing.
on the back burner?
Yeah, that's the thing. But theoretically, at the end of this season, if that was the way, if because they're appealing, aren't they?
Yeah.
And if the appeal was upheld and City faced their ban, yeah, you'd have Sheffield United in the Champions League qualifying.
Well, I think that's the hope. Well, it was the hope for a lot of Arsenal and Man United fans dreaming of getting back into the Champions League by pretty much the only means that would have been possible, which would have been that fifth place spot. But given everything that's happened at the moment, I'm not convinced that's even going to come close to going on the table until probably the next European Cup. I mean, I doubt that. I'd be very surprised to see them even do European football next season, depending on
Well,
how delayed the start of the season is.
that's the thing, which is something else I was wondering about. Is what's the point in even finishing these seasons in full if, say, for example, Sheffield United, they fight tooth and nail and they get fourth, right? They're 5 points behind Chelsea, as are Wolves, so they could theoretically both finish above Chelsea, and they qualify for the Champions League on merit without City's ban. So, do they play next year's Champions League? Do they miss because they just decide to finish European competition next season? I mean, if you're not going to get the rewards of finishing the year, what's the point?
Yeah, I mean that would be very unfortunate for a team like, especially like Sheffield, who, well, not to be
Or
rude to
even
them, but they might not get another opportunity to have that European game, or
or
like
even
get through the
Wolves?
group stage. Yeah, exactly. Well, Wolves is a difficult one because they do have very good financial backing and a lot of like high tier players, whereas Sheffield, they're batting, aren't they? I mean, I think part of the, I'm not to take anything away from them, but I think the rest of the league has been so poor this season that it has
Oh, yeah,
given them a good springboard to get up there. So what I'm saying is that it might be a real big challenge for them ever to get another opportunity to do it, especially,
I
well,
agree.
in the next few seasons at least, unless they can really cement themselves in there. But that would be very, very unfortunate.
Definitely. I mean, Wolves, they do have the financial backing. I mean, in the Championship, people like Ruben Neves don't exactly come out of a Christmas cracker. So they're gonna. When you look at Leicester, for example, Wolves are probably going to be knocking on that door sooner or later. But even so, 2 years out after promotion to be in the Champions League is, I think, that's more than exceeding expectations.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
So,
it is interesting to look at it though, because I mean, even if you did go on to continue the games of football, I feel like it would almost be a farce for Leicester not to get those Champions League spots, given how good their season's been. But they were starting to really tail off at the end there.
hmm,
So, I mean, it's a hard one to juggle where clubs would stand in terms of how much it would really benefit them, because there's going to be so many teams who generally believe that they can nick one of those spots. I mean, watching what's been going on in the Bundesliga since their restart, it's been a little bit of a shambles, honestly, just in terms of you can tell which teams have. I don't even. Well, there's a lot of speculation here, but what sort of training different clubs have actually been able to carry out compared to each other? Because
it's a mess, isn't it?
the level of fitness. I mean, some of the teams are so much, well, in such a better like shape compared to the other clubs, and then some of them they have taken these first few games to even like find their feet again. Like the standard of play in some of the games. Like, I was watching Werder Bremen, Mönchengladbach last night, and it was just a mess, an awful game of football. It was like watching a League Two game.
Pre-season friendly is what it is. That's the
Exactly.
sort of standard. League Two. I mean, I wouldn't knock League Two. League Two's carnage.
No,
Twenty.
I love League Two football, but this is supposed to be like a top tier European league, and it's a
Yeah.
sham of what it is. Not. I don't really think it's doing justice to the rest of the games that are being played in the season.
I
It's all
think
come far too soon.
it's not very even either. You look at some of the teams that have got players with the coronavirus uh, positive test. You look at someone like Bournemouth, they're 18th. Their first choice goalkeeper is now going to miss a week of first team training. You look at other teams that are going to have positive tests in the coming weeks because it can't be avoided. New tests are coming up all the time. Got Watford. Troy Deeney doesn't want to play.
Like, he's not alone
Right.
in that either, is he? I mean,
No,
there's obviously that conversation that's going on at the moment about whether certain minorities do have like a more detrimental impact when they do get COVID or not. And it does seem to be that, I mean, it's not really entirely based in what I can see as massive facts at the moment, but for those kind of people, it's not worth them taking that risk and putting
exactly.
themselves in these situations just so a couple of people can watch a bit of TV.
Agree. And if you're Troy Deeney, you've got, I mean, unless he wants to drive to Durham and test his eyesight by a castle, he's not really going to gain anything from going out, leaving the quarantine regulations, and then risk bringing home an illness to his young son who's ill. I mean, we treat football as a do or die thing. It's really not at the end of the day. And
Yeah, well, I mean, I
for the
think it's probably put things into perspective for a lot of people who were completely obsessed with football. I think
do or
we can
die,
probably sit in that segment of the population.
hmm,
But yeah, right now it's a bit of a mad time to be contemplating doing that. Especially, I understand that obviously they're going to be doing more tests and everything's going to be really regulated. So you could put the air quotes around it and say it's sort of safe. But if there are government guidelines on how everyone should be living their lives at the moment, we shouldn't be making exceptions just for a bit of entertainment.
great. I mean, look, at the end of the day, we're all taking the mick out of Dominic Cummings at the moment. At the same time, would we really be acceptable to be rushing football back just for money? You
Well,
can't have it both ways. Either we've all got to follow the guidelines, includes footballers, because they're going to want to follow the guidelines for their own health as well as their families. And it doesn't seem right that just because the Premier League wants to rush back football for their money, that we therefore force people to do something that a lot of them aren't going to want to do.
yeah, I mean, it's one of the few times when I would have agreed with what something Danny Rose says, because
Oh,
normally he does come out with a lot of hot air, but for once in this actual case, he is 100% correct. Another thing that I sort of struggle with the idea of it all coming back is the fact that there's obviously some people in the country, and we've all seen it, who are struggling with the idea of what a lockdown is and what they should and shouldn't be doing. And what sort of example is this going to set when they see that normality is coming back in their heads and say this is, yeah, one of the things that they're most interested in? They're just going to start thinking that, oh yeah, I can just go out and do whatever the hell I want to do. Like it's going to make things harder for everyone else.
great. And ultimately, I think the Premier League can sit there all they like and say, we've got this massive testing program and all of this. Testing doesn't fix anything. All testing does is just tell you who's got it. And if you've got a team, say for example, I mean the relegation zone is a mess at the moment. Say West Ham, right? They're currently out of the relegation zone by 3 goals. West Ham get 6 or 7 of their first team players test positive during the games, and therefore they have to go into isolation, blah blah blah, and they miss games. Is that fair? Is that any more or less fair? So therefore, say they go down because they miss a lot of their players. Is that more or less fair than calling it after 29 games?
See, that's the thing because, I mean, you've got to look at their track record so far, and the only thing that actually got them to stop the league in the first place when the rest of the world had pretty much slowed down, obviously bar America, was Mikel Arteta and some of the Arsenal players getting the virus. They clearly are only thinking of the bank balance. I mean, from a business point of view, I do get it, but it doesn't set a good precedent for our league, given that it's supposed to be the best league in the world and the one that everyone's looking at, no matter what country they're from.
Definitely not the best league in the world.
Well, it's what
Championship,
they like
hands
to
down.
say, isn't it? Yeah, well, you can go on about that as much as you like, but I'm more talking about, well, it's how they present themselves, isn't it? It's the most watched, it's the big money, but
You enjoy it. You win something.
it doesn't, I don't think it's going to actually help the situation, forcing it back as fast as possible. Obviously, there's talk of this, what, 362 million is it, that they're going to owe if even if games are played, there's going to be a certain amount of money each week that will go towards them. I
I
mean,
think there's two different arguments you can have here because obviously they're two different businesses. What the EFL does and what the Premier League does, I think there's different arguments to be made. There was earlier on in the week, the Huddersfield chairman was saying that the clubs, the 40, 50, or even 60 clubs that would face severe financial difficulties that didn't finish this season, and then it was impacted into next season, and you missed a lot of next season as well. So from that perspective, it creates a different argument. But most of the Premier League, if not all of it, doesn't have that financial problem. So the argument, the main argument for continuing the football is whether clubs survive, and that's one I'm very sympathetic to. But you don't have that argument in the Premier League. If we don't play the remaining 9 games of this season, are Everton going to go out of business? No.
but that's the
So
thing I really think that the league needs to look at, because regardless of how self-protectionist each club is going to be at the moment, the damage that would be caused from losing, say, I don't know, if we don't do anything, 50% of the EFL, it would destroy English football as it currently is. We'd end up in some sort of SPL-like shenanigans, where there's two leagues and a couple of decent teams, and that we need that's one of the reasons why I think the English game is probably the most interesting, is because we have that huge ladder where players filter up and down. If we start losing rungs of that ladder, it's just gonna completely screw with everything, isn't it?
yeah, and that's why I think there's got to be something that can be done for the EFL, trickle down some of the money from the Premier League. That's obviously a completely different conversation. It's something that I think if teams are truly selfless and we really are the best league in the world, it's something that we'll happily do. Although, you know, nobody stepped in to help Bury.
No, but then that
Local teams, for example, didn't really do a whole lot. I know it's a different circumstance and things like that, but
that's the thing. I mean, if you look at it like that, because it was a one-off kind of issue. I know clubs do close every so often, but the shape that the EFL is in terms of most clubs, even before this, is very poorly financially managed,
there'll be
as it
dozens of
is.
berries. There'll be dozens of, and they're not necessarily badly managed. It's just the case that it's very hard to you look at a Premier League team, you look at all the outgoings. It just there's just nothing trickling down. It'd be like trying to win the Formula One World Championship with a team that's at the back of the grid. You don't have the budget of a Mercedes or a Ferrari, and therefore, how are you going to beat them? And the money isn't going to trickle down in the same way, and that's why you're at the back. It's
I
the same with the League One and League Two system. So if you suddenly don't have the small revenue stream, which you do have, which is gate receipts, Sky money every now and then when you somehow end up on the telly, where's the small amount of income going to come from that covers your bills? And then suddenly the problems that teams like Bury had, where you literally cannot
mm,
pay to turn the lights on or anything. You're not going to have these problems in the Premier. Would be a much better source of everybody's time. You play 2 games, call it at 29, and then we can focus on seeing what we can do to help football in general.
but I think that is the only option that is on the table. Really, is some sort of bailout that is paid for by Premier League clubs. Otherwise, the whole thing is just going to fall apart. But then, how do you actually decide how much money goes to each team? It surely would have to be done the same level for every club say you did it on a league by league basis, because you can't say, oh yeah, well these guys are way in a much worse position and then give them more money, because that could be construed as an unfair advantage, couldn't it?
I'm not totally sure how this plan would go down. You would have to. I mean, it's difficult because if you didn't have Premier League football playing, that Sky money could be redistributed.
But then you're getting
Mm.
into sort of ethical argument with Sky that, given this
Yeah,
current situation, surely they need to waive their rights to that money. If something can be agreed that this sort of saved money could be then transferred down, and those bills could then be used to save the rest of the footballing league pyramid or whatever, then a huge part of that would be down to Sky, and they're going to start calling, well, like a lot of other companies are doing at the moment, and talking about things like acts of God and stuff like that, which seems to mean that people don't have to commit to any of their financial agreements. It's
in insurance terms, acts for God is not good.
Well, exactly, but surely the Premier League could start looking at that angle if things do start turning nasty. Because I mean, how is it going to look for Sky if that? Surely they'd end up looking bad in this situation if they're taking all of this money from all the footballing clubs for stuff that was for sort of services they never got. I understand that the money of the Premier League is absolutely insane in terms of the TV rights, and they're obviously going to want to get what they're paid for. But if those games can't happen because of a literal global disaster, surely that there has to be some sort of discussion about that.
The Sky money, you get more Sky money, obviously, the more you appear on TV. The games, you would have got your Sky money in May, primarily in April, because a lot of games are played in April, and then the games in March that weren't played. Don't play those games in the Premier League, and EFL has to continue and finish their season, which I can understand they feel they would need to. Why don't you put them on Sky Sports?
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. But I mean, are you
Let-
saying that they can't? Well, they need to do it to get the people in the gates to pay the bills. Is that what you're saying?
When you're in on a League One or a League Two team, if you've got no one coming through the gates and you've got no ticket receipts or anything like that, that's a huge financial cost.
Mm,
It's a huge breakdown too. But if you've got plenty of games and put on Sky Sports, like we have with the Premier League, where it seems half the league seems to play over the weekend, you you could very easily distribute that money throughout the league, and you could provide some relief. It's not going to be much, but as far as I see it, the Premier League only needs to play two more games. Let's be honest, Liverpool are not going to drop. What was it, a 25-point lead?
yeah, something like
It's
that.
9 point in 9 games. They're not going to drop a 25-point lead. So all the debate and argument over Liverpool shouldn't just be made champions because they haven't won it yet. They have. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. They've won the league. Only real game, any interest is United versus Villa. Simply because it determines who goes down and it can determine European places for next season. Even your game against City is somewhat meaningless. If you
Well,
win
it
it,
wouldn't get us
you
anywhere.
go seventh at best, unless you tank City.
Yeah, but
Only
there's always going to
you
be
won't move
there's
at all.
always going to be groups of fans out there, no matter what club it is, that will claim that, well, like I would have said before this happened, is that Arsenal were starting to get a little bit of form. And then they will say, well, we need to play those last games to actually find out where we would have finished. Now, I see what you're saying. Well, I think the key thing is whether the Champions League is happening or not. Because if that's not happening next season, that and the Europa, it
8
doesn't
points
matter
off
where
anyway.
anyone finishes apart from who's won and who's going down. That's all that matters if the European Cups aren't going to happen. And I don't think they will, because it's going to take so long to get all of the European key leagues back into sync that they're surely going to have to shorten next season. And if that means taking out the European Cup, well, I can't see any way of doing it. I mean, for God's sake, get rid of the League Cup. This can finally be our opportunity to ditch
Oh,
the
well, well, well,
ridiculous
well.
trophy. Yeah, I know you got there this year, and it was a
Yeah,
valiant effort, but it
no,
is a waste of time.
no, it isn't. The League Cup's a great competition because it often, I mean, until Man City get winning it every 5 minutes in this decade.
I think if maybe there has to be a rule like there is in the Champions League where you have to play a certain quota of your actual team.
I think I'll tell you what would be a good idea. Do what they've done in the Checker Trade Trophy, where teams, for example, Premier League teams can enter their under 23s team.
Well, I mean, in a way, that's kind of what they're doing. Well, Liverpool
But
especially
it's
this
well,
year.
but it's set in stone. Even if you get to the semi-finals or the final, you've got to play your under 23s.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
really
how
don't
would you?
care about it. Why would you? Why do you have to cancel it for everybody else? Because you want to play, you want to focus on the Europa League or the Champions League or something. Just enter your under 23s team.
But don't you think it would add a little bit more sort of excitement for the FA Cup if that was the big domestic cup? I mean, no other league has this secondary cup. I mean, La Liga has something, don't they? Where
Yeah,
it's
but
I can't.
they've got a more expanded Super Cup as well.
Mm.
Um, the League Cups have gone fine since the 60s. I don't understand why suddenly it needs to go just because certain teams feel that their priorities need to stretch.
But I mean, I don't even think that it should be put into a kind of grouping where it's just top half Premier League teams that don't care. Because, I mean, I know Villa were an exception to the rule normally, but a lot of the teams who have just been promoted or are fighting in around that relegation spot also don't really field anyone for it.
Oh, I mean, we dropped certain players often out of injury, but we certainly played a few players that weren't. And when we played Wolves fielded a very key team, shall we say? And as did Liverpool when we played Liverpool, of course, with with the fixture clash.
Mm.
But if that's the way you want to play it, and you don't want to play your full team, or you can't play your full team,
I mean, yeah, that was a ridiculous situation in itself, but I feel like that's probably been done to death.
you can't just cancel a competition. I mean, look at Bradford in 2012-13 when they made a league. What were they? League Two at the time. You got to the final. They
Yeah.
beat us both on the way. A competition that stops that sort of thing happening by cancelling it, I think, is a bit of a joke.
But then
Personally,
what about an opt-out?
opt out what you like.
Yeah, so
In that case,
surely that's the best situation.
in that scenario, if you want to opt out, it wouldn't be better to just not play. It'd be better to let your under 23s play with your under 23 manager and give your youth team an opportunity to shine. Be the best way to get them games.
Yeah, you might be right, especially given the situation these days, well, that we
With
have with the England team, especially where English players and talent can't actually ever get a game at a high level.
this sort of thing, but in an irony, the League Cup has caused the 28 games for some and 29 for others, because obviously the two games that are unplayed are because us and City were in the League Cup final. But there's no reason um, why you couldn't have a League Cup next season, or maybe you could take a 1 year gap from it because the FA Cup isn't going to be finished this year, and maybe you just have an FA Cup next year. But I don't see it as a long-term reason to cancel the damn thing.
But that's the thing. I have a suspicion that because it's probably quite likely it's going to be on the chopping board for next year, there will be a segment of people involved in football that will say, for God's sake, let's get rid of it now. That's the only reason why I really brought it up in discussion.
They can say what they like, but it's a trophy and it's there to be won. And if you want to go for it, go for it. Like Swansea did, like Bradford ended up nearly accidentally doing. I mean, even Blues won it.
Yep.
So you're going to deny these teams an opportunity to win something because they're never going to win an FA Cup. They're never going to get to the Champions League. They're never going to win the league unless something happens and some billionaire goes and buy them or something.
Yeah,
So it seems silly to me. But
you're probably right. But I feel like we have gone down quite the rabbit hole there. So
Yeah,
I guess we'll bring it back to the actual discussion about what's going on with Project Restart, especially in the Premier League terms. So I think the latest thing that was discussed and agreed today was the fact that they're getting into full contact training now, where I think that's going to be a real concern in terms of, I know with the guidelines that they have at the moment, that they are doing testing. I don't know how often that is. I don't think anyone has accurate information on that. But are they doing it on a daily basis? Because surely coming into training, if they are going to be doing full contact, that's going to be a strict requirement, surely.
that's another thing. I mean, it's an argument that fans have been making for years with refereeing standards being stupidly stricter nowadays, and always a contact sport.
Looking at a lot of the Bundesliga games, I know that yeah, they've made an effort to put all this stuff in place, but I mean, there's been so many obvious signs, and you can look through clips and highlights of the games and look at stories about how players are getting told off, where they're really not following the guidelines as strictly as they should be. I mean, there was times, was it Mönchengladbach who were celebrating with each other and hugging and all of this, and then there was
Natural.
watching again. I think it was the Bayern game at the weekend where one of the guys, it must have been on the board of directors or whatever. The camera panned to him and he moved his mask down to rub his nose with his hand. And I mean, this is all really basic stuff, but you can't expect human beings not to make little mistakes like this. And the exact
Exactly.
same thing will happen with the Premier League.
Exactly. To be honest, I mean, there was one bit of highlight that I saw from the Bundesliga the other day. A player went in for a tackle, and the other player basically gave the ball up to avoid the contact.
Mm,
So, is that not some? So that needs to do is to happen in a certain area. So you've got it's the last game of the season. You've got I don't know, a Bournemouth player running one on one, and a certain player from the opposition dives out of the way because they don't want to get the contact. It's a goal. Bournemouth stay out. Someone else goes down. Is it not throwing some degree of the sort of the validity, perhaps, of the league? If you're 'cause some players, if the players have got young children and families and things, they're going to be less up for it, as Troy Deeney has showed, than other players who aren't in that sort of scenario.
I think you're pretty much hitting the nail on the head there because, I mean, normally I wouldn't really feel sorry for footballers at all, given that the amount of wage and well, pretty much the high life that they normally lead. But it seems at the moment that due to the contracts that they've signed, they're almost in a bit of a slave labour scenario where unless they make it kick up a big fuss and get right in the limelight, they are pretty much being forced to play. I don't think there's any more beating around the bush that you can do. But regardless of whether you're talking about slide challenges and stuff, and are you trying to
Thing.
miss things and stuff like that, what about corners? How are you ever going to stop players from all over the shot clashing into each other? I mean, the Bremen game at the weekend was some of the worst defending I've ever seen. I mean, is that down to the fact that they're bad? I know they're down the bottom half of the table, but nobody was even going to like fight for these headers. Same thing with Hinteregger scored two against Bayern
Hey,
Munich. Yes, great
yeah,
efforts, but nobody's fighting in the box for these balls because they don't want to get in contact with each other. And that goes
shot
into
would miss it.
exactly what you say is that they're not going to put their bodies on the line in the same way that they normally would do. So yeah, it makes it really difficult to take what's going on at the moment seriously in terms of the results that we're going to get from the games.
Some will and some won't, but you'll never know for sure all of the ones that did and all the ones that didn't.
Mm,
And so you can't really, you're going to find it really difficult to look at it with any degree of um, validity because you're just going to look at it and go, well, Watford, maybe Watford went down because they were missing Deeney's goals.
yeah, I
Well,
mean that goes
is
back
that
to
fair?
what you were saying as well about. I mean, say half a squad gets taken out by COVID, do we stop the whole thing again? Is there going to be a guideline that games for a specific club can't be played if they've got, say, more than six players out with the virus? I mean, this all does lead into the kind of conversation of well, we don't really know how long this is really going to go on for in terms of something that's impacting our daily lives. But in the meantime, if you are really talking about it in a footballing perspective, even though I guess it does, it's a little bit of a ridiculous conversation to be having at the moment in general anyway. But if we are actually going to go ahead with it, how are we going to make it so that the games that are getting played are sort of, I don't know, as you're saying, as fair for the league as a whole? Like, what rules are there going to be?
The other thing, I'm gonna speak as a Villa fan. So I would look at it and go, if we get that Sheffield United game, I don't think it's fair that you would cancel it now because for a start, the legal team at Villa would be suing the Premier League if they announced it now. That's a lawsuit would be in the post by tomorrow morning because you couldn't relegate a team for having less games than other people. But if we all got to 29 games, we lost to Sheffield United, then we didn't go down because we didn't play 9 extra games, which we should have done. We went down because we haven't played well enough in the 29 games that we've played. And that goes across the board for everybody else. So I don't think anyone could have a realistic, sensible argument for saying, well, we could have won our last 9 games and then we'd finish fourth. Yeah, well, the previous form over the other 29 suggests that you couldn't. I mean, ultimately, the games that we've got left, one of them's more or less a nothing game, and that moves you up maybe 1 or 2 positions if you win. You've got to beat Man City by 4 goals, I think, to go above Wolves. So good luck with that.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I think
no,
you're right about the fact that, well, specifically from an Arsenal point of view, although you could say that, yes, took before the COVID issue hit back in early March, we were starting to play better. We were getting a few more wins. There were still too many draws, but things were sort of moving up a little bit, and there was a little bit more hope that we could be challenging for those spots. But when a disaster like this has actually happened, you can't really go on hearsay about, oh yeah, things were looking a little bit better. This was our worst season in the whole time that I've been following Arsenal. I mean,
what funny?
by a long shot. Yeah, it's hilarious to joke about it and stuff like
It was,
that. But
it's funny because you won less games than we did until about early February.
exactly, if you can't really argue, you can't use the point that, oh yeah, we're
Yeah,
looking a little bit better to wipe out the fact that we're in the position that we're in at the moment because we've been shocking overall.
exactly. And I don't think there's any fairer thing that you could say. We play Sheffield United, right? By the way, also, all of these coronavirus tests, what are they testing before and after every training session or something?
I
Or
believe
whatever.
so. Well, think of where
Uh,
those tests could actually be going to
exactly,
places that really need it.
exactly. Instead, all you need to do is you do that for you say right. So we go right. These games will be played in 2 weeks' time. The 2 matches we need to finish off. Say one on a Saturday, and then you finish off with the big Premier League special, Villa Sheffield United, blah blah blah. You do the 2 games. So you've got 2 weeks to do some training. We test 4 teams in that period, and that's it. Not 20. You can therefore put efforts into testing. You could donate that to perhaps certain hospitals, certain other areas that need that sort of medical expertise. You play your 2 games. If we go down, we go down. If Sheffield United finish in the top five, they'd finish in the top five. Whatever happens, happens. Call it at 29. If anyone's got anything to complain about, which they will, because people always do, at the end of the day, you, you've played 29 games. That's a pretty big um, it's a pretty big sort of area over your season to cover. If we'd played 19 games, fair enough. I think at that point you'd probably be looking at scrapping it and starting again.
I mean, taking your point of the sort of cutting it down to those 2 games even further, surely we have the infrastructure and the ability these days to even make it so, say, all the players stayed on campus at a hotel or whatever just for the 2 weeks beforehand, so we could even cut down even further on the amount of testing that would be required.
I mean, there is an argument you could play both games at St George's Park. I do think that would be slightly unfair because in a game that could determine whether we stay up, well, will determine whether we stay up or not, we're at home. So, fans or not, I think you deserve that little bit of advantage. But by the way, there's no fan who could honestly look themselves in the mirror and say, I mean, like, you're an Arsenal fan. Could you honestly tell yourself you were going to win the last 9 games, score 27 points, and finish third?
It would be unlikely.
There you go then. It's not. And any other teams to Norwich, 6 points adrift. Happen. I mean, Wigan made a habit of doing it. Sunderland made a habit of doing it with a different manager every year. But realistically, is it going to happen? Probably not.
Mm.
And so there's a reason they're 6 points adrift. I hate to say it because we weren't up with them, but there's a reason you're that far adrift. And in extraordinary circumstances, I think you would just have to accept that they're relegated. Same as if we lose. We lose or draw, then your results over those 29 games make it clear and fair. And then when the EFL make their decision, analyse their decision because there seems to be a little bit of uncertainty about that. Bournemouth and Norwich go down. The top is as it is. Liverpool are champions. Blah blah blah. And is that really so wrong? It's the most cost effective. It's the most effective in terms of resources, testing, all of that. Plus, what it gives you is time. You could restart the season in August if the circumstances are acceptable, because you've got 2.5 months to sit and work out what exactly can we do in that time frame, how close to normal football can we get in that time frame, and it kind of works out best for everybody because you've got certain circumstances like Manchester United. You've got Igalo that I think has to go back to China, doesn't he?
Yeah, that is a very interesting part of the conversation, actually, because
And loan contracts will end at the end of June. So yeah, players are going to go.
but that's something I've been wondering about specifically from an Arsenal perspective with, say, players like William Saliba. The French league has now been cancelled. Would he be eligible to play for Arsenal if the league starts in early June?
How old is he? Is he 20 or 21?
I think he's 19.
19,
Mm.
then he would be eligible because of his age.
Mm.
But anybody who's got players that are out on loan, coming back to the club, might want to use them. You're allowed to register them. I know in certain circumstances we've been allowed to re-register Tom Heaton and Wesley, who had serious injuries back in December and are basically back because it's the end of the season.
But that's the thing. Like that
Is
goes
that
back into
fair?
the that goes back into the fairness argument. I mean, that's just another reason why it's just like how many there'll be so many clubs, especially ones that don't have as much money, where they could see like the best quarter of their team just disappear off into the night, and then they've got to field whatever they've got left.
I think that you'd have to have some sort of unanimous agreement. I think Manchester United have said that they would allow Dean Henderson to stay, wouldn't they?
Mm.
Equally, I think you'd have to have that agreement across the board. Couldn't have
It'd have to
some
be
clubs,
fully agreed.
can't have some clubs saying, "Oh, they can stay," or other clubs saying, well, "No, you can't." And it works for foreign loans as well from abroad. So you can have a blanket, right? Well, loans from Spain have got to come back, or whatever.
Yeah, but then that's leading into expecting UEFA to do something, and fat
Exactly.
chance of that.
I mean, you can make the fair argument up to a certain degree because this whole situation is unfair. There's always going to be a certain amount of, well, this is fair. We went down because we didn't have enough games. We missed the Champions League, so we didn't have enough games. Yeah, you've got to accept that there is going to be a degree of unfairness. But I think if you have to get on and play these games, which for the life of me, I think it's completely wrong. You've got to this loan thing as well goes down to the EFL as well because the amount of Premier League clubs that have loaned players out.
Exactly. It touches every club.
Do their contracts come back at the end of June? Players who are in their last years of their contract at the club, do they leave
I
halfway through
mean,
the
that's the
season?
thing. It's even worse in a situation where you've got Leagues One and Two, which I think is one of the reasons why they had to end it is the fact that the contracts there end in May, like 1st of
Yeah.
May. So
A
that
lot
like,
of them will be 1-year deals, year deals, very short-term contracts,
but
aren't they?
what's going to happen with transfer windows? I mean, how there's especially when you get down to like a League Two level, they almost get new squads every season. When's
Exactly.
any of that going to happen? How are they going to afford to pay anyone anything to build up a new squad?
I just think the problem is no one's got any answers, and these are all questions and things that if we go back to the Premier League, could all have been debated properly rather than focusing efforts on when can we keep playing. Had they just from the get go had the foresight, play 2 more games and they were done, and then you can sit and
Surely,
work out.
surely the best thing we can do in this scenario now to protect the game as it is in England is to finish it off with those games that you're talking about to get to the 29 and then just go on to next season like we would in any other year as much as we can, even if we have to delay the start of that a little bit.
Exactly, because it buys you time. It buys you 2.5 months. It would have been era 3, maybe even 4 back, sort of April time when they could have made this decision. It allows contracts to stay in sync. It allows the transfer window to stay in sync, and all of the usual sort of details of a season, and then the interim between seasons. All of that would still stay in its time sync. So it just seems that they're very narrow-minded in we must have our Premier League football back, we must get the money, blah 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 blah. The bigger picture, I think.
Well, I
Premier
guess,
League, sorry,
yeah, I guess we know where we stand on this one overall.
agreement. That's a rare change.
Yeah, I don't think you guys listening will hear that again for quite a while, but we shall see. I think, well, I guess that's probably wrapping this episode up for now overall. I guess the only other thing to discuss a little bit is what's going on with the only football going on in Europe at the moment, which is a little discussion about the Bundesliga. I don't know how much have you been watching so far, Drabs?
Um, the sort of YouTube highlights, don't they, come up and 5 6 minute highlights of the games. I've watched through a couple of them. Do you know what? It's empty and it's soulless. Football is more than just a game, and to just see it played in these huge empty arenas, just to finish off a few games left of a season, looks a bit tragic, to be honest.
Well, I mean, even goes back to what you were saying when you were talking about should the like Villa game be played at St George's Park or should it be at home for you guys as there would be an advantage. But I don't even know if that's really valid at the moment because looking at, say, what would have happened in the Dortmund Schalke game if the Schalke fans had been in the stadium, I can't ever seeing it being a 4-0 loss. I mean, I don't know what the previous results usually are in that game, but it seemed pretty extreme given the situation.
Oh, certain games. I mean, imagine if you've got to play this sort of scenario, or
Mm.
Liverpool, Manchester United, or if we were back in the Championship, a second City derby in this sort of scenario, be the most boring thing you could imagine, wouldn't it? Because without fans, it's nothing.
Yeah. No, I
You
think
might as well just watch a kickabout in the park
it's
with
certainly
more
not this.
technical
It's
ability.
certainly not the same. I think it's definitely an acquired taste of whether you can put up with it or not. Or I guess it leans into the idea of how bored you are at the moment, whether you are going to watch it. But I mean, I'm definitely going to say that I've enjoyed watching it. It's not a league. If anything, I'm enjoying more finding out about players in the league because it's not a league I've ever watched. I mean, the viewing numbers compared to normal must be through the roof at the moment.
Mm.
But it's certainly interesting. I mean, going back to what you said, it certainly is. Well, football itself is probably. I think it was what was the quote that I heard back in the past? I think it was. I can't remember who said it, but I think it was that football is the most important of the unimportant things in life. And I
Mm.
think now that is proving to be even more poignant than it ever has been. But it
Yeah,
still seems to be that people can't see past it. I mean, we're in a situation where people across the world are dying and there's still a huge conversation about when we can get people kicking a ball around.
funny about the game. All it is just greed and avarice. It always is. It shows up the best. Well, it's not really the best, but it shows up the most in the Premier League. Always home of greed.
Mm. I think the Bundesliga itself, I guess there was a little bit more of a reason to do it because
It's
both
not as
top and
bad.
yeah, well, as well, yeah, we don't need to get into the conversation about how well countries have been dealing with it overall because that's
Um,
dangerous talk.
I was talking more about the Bundesliga's not like Premier League levels of greed
No,
and
I th
money driven.
I think a big part of it as well was that it was really, well, very much undecided. I mean, there was only a few points in it. I mean, yeah, you could say beforehand, well, Bayern will probably do it. Maybe Dortmund will have a go, but it's already panning out to be that Bayern are probably going to do it.
After the win, yeah. It's not that Bayern weren't quite in a Liverpool position, were they?
No, I mean, they very easily, well, they had a tough run of fixtures and there were what, four other teams, three other teams that could have had a go for it.
Leipzig, Dortmund, and was it
Gladbach,
Mönchengladbach?
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's panning out pretty much as we expected, although the quality is absolutely horrendous in most cases. And it's, well, it must, I don't know how I'd feel about it because it's easier for us to watch as, oh yeah, it's a pretty decent league, but in another country. But what is going through the heads of the actual fans in Germany who are, because there's a lot of ultras out there.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
I'd
think
love to know what their thoughts are on what they're seeing, especially when their teams are just playing horrendously.
depends who you support. If you're a Bayern fan, I think you'd think it's brilliant that you go back. If you're a Paderborn fan, for example, you think you know what's going to happen either way, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, they're probably, well, they probably enjoyed the whole promotion party, but aside from that, a lot of them are probably wishing that it had just been ended so they can go back and potentially start winning a few games.
The Norwich, aren't they? That's the thing,
Yeah.
if we do go down, I wouldn't bothered about being in the championship. It's great, and that's the other thing about the championship, right? So, say they do end up finishing off the championship season. You've got some first-hand experience of this. Can you imagine the playoffs like this?
Yeah, it would be absolutely horrendous.
Playoffs are the most passionate and emotional thing that any football fan can go through because it's 3 games of solid pain, or two, depending on how well you get on. And it's imagine that in this sort of scenario.
Well, I mean, the
That
amount
would
of gain that clubs can get from winning those playoffs, especially going from Championship to Premier League, and just to have that fritter away behind closed doors.
would you play it at an empty Wembley, or would you play it at St George's Park, or somewhere between the two teams? I mean,
I mean, how often do some clubs get the opportunity to be in the playoff and then the fans miss that one time that might happen, not happen for another 20 years? Like, that is not fair on a fan. I don't think anyone could argue that there's a positive for that.
it wouldn't surprise me if the Championship went the way of the what is it? They call it the average points per game or whatever it is.
I
That
have
wouldn't
seen a
shock
lot of
me.
articles about that.
I think Leeds and West Brom are pretty safe bets for promotion. Not sure how they would work the playoffs. Would they just promote the third team, or
But
would
that's
they
the
just
thing, even with the leagues one and two, or I think at least I know for definite League Two, is that they've done the automatic promotion spots, but they're still saying that the playoffs are still going to happen at some point. They haven't figured that one out either. Nobody knows what to do with the playoffs, it seems.
that's that it's an interesting sort of debate with that in to Scotland very quickly with Hearts. What they've been relegated by how they've ended the Scottish season,
Mm.
and they're proposing a 14-14 Scottish league. I think it's 14-14, or I can't remember exactly how it's split, but they're proposing, so they would go back up along with the two teams that were promoted, and you would rearrange the Scottish leagues like that. So there's all different methods across the board to do all sorts of things. Some of it well motivated, some of it not.
I think that's where it does get really convoluted, especially in England, where you have so many different governing bodies all doing completely different things. and then it all sort of has to link in together and somehow work out of the end of that. I mean, is there no conversations going on between these two leagues, or are they all just doing whatever the hell they want?
Between which two leagues, sir?
Well, I mean, you've got what's going on with the EFL, you've got what's going on with the Premier League, and then you've got what's going on in like non-league. They're all being decided in completely different things with completely different methods. Surely the FA has to step in and try and at least guide a discussion of doing things in the same manner. I mean, it's too late now because so many of the leagues have already gone off on their own and decided exactly what they're going to do. It's just all a bit of a mess.
I mean, there was something Richard Masters said yesterday where is that they want to continue supporting the football pyramid, but it's basically said that the stance of the Premier League of not providing more money to the EFL is something he backs and defends. Clubs that go down often struggle. It's very rare unless they've got really, really rich owners that they bounce back up, or the quality of the league isn't quite as good. Um, Partly because you when you go up, you give players Premier League wages, and then when you come back down again, if you can't shift the ball, or there's signings that aren't working out as well as you'd hoped, you're stuck with these players on big wages. I
Yeah,
mean, we certainly had when we went down. We were playing in the Championship with players on 50, 60 grand a week.
well, Micah Richards.
Mm. So, yes. So, if you're sat in that position, this is a scenario that will be, even Championship clubs will have this sort of scenario that perhaps have been in the Premier League in recent years or have taken some punts on some players. And it's not, to try and reach the playoffs of the Premier League and it's not worked out. It's not as black and white as I think people like Richard Masters in the Premier League would like to have it be.
Yeah. I mean, that does lean back to what I was saying earlier about, especially in the Championship, I think it's true, with those that are pushing for the playoffs, they are always riding the limit of financial play rules and doing quite a lot of wheeler dealering, which really had no thought going into it for something like this to happen because there's no way that anyone could ever have seen this coming. So, yeah, it's obviously going to leave a state of disarray. I think there's no denying that. But
I mean, yeah, you've got to accept that anything that is done is not going to please everybody, and it's not going to seem on the surface level fair, but it's got to be well intentioned, and it's got to be as genuine as you can make it. So whilst I mean, we were talking about the Premier League relegation earlier on. A Norwich fan will look at it and go, "We could have, it's not necessarily fair that we could have gone down, but at the same time, we're 6 points and some goal difference behind. So it's not fair, but at the end of the day, you have to accept it because of where they are. If you apply that sort of logic to a lot of the decisions throughout the football pyramid, I think some good can be done, but it doesn't seem to be the way they're approaching it, even if it's 20, 10, 15 or 20. I mean, furore over Berry going out of business, Bolton's administration, we've seen it happen over the years. Teams really, really hit hard with huge points deductions and sent to the bottom of the football pyramid and things like that, or these points deductions effectively relegating them. Imagine that on a 10, 15 club scale.
well, I think in that situation, I don't think there would ever be, well, there wouldn't have been a darker day in English footballing terms, really, would there? Aside from, I mean, some horrific incidents that have obviously happened in the past, but purely from a footballing perspective, there wouldn't have been anything worse than that. But we surely are in an age where the clubs can come together and to prevent that from happening. Otherwise, what's really the point in any of it? Because it's not even just about the football at that stage. It's about the communities and all the people that are involved in these clubs. It's not just 20 players, well, 20 odd players turning up every week on a bus to kick a ball about. It goes so much further than that. And it's key to some cities and communities just to even improve people's lives on a day to day basis. And a lot of people rely on it.
You know, when I was saying about all the money and the testing for all 20 teams, if you just play those two games, that testing and money could go into testing players to play the League Two playoffs. Or if you froze all the leagues and played those playoffs across the pyramid, it's going to be a power limitation and pretty poor version of the playoffs. But if that's the only way forward, you could use that testing on them. Those
Well, I mean,
teams could use Premier League facilities nearby to do these tests because to have access to a local Premier League team's medical facilities and that sort of thing.
you never know. Someone might in the FA or whatever might be listening to this podcast and they might get a nice. I feel like we've come up with a few decent ideas, but I think overall this is probably a good place to wrap it up for episode 1. I don't know if you've got any parting thoughts.
I don't think it's probably any ideas that somebody at some level hasn't thought of already. It's just you've got to hope that they go down the right route and don't let greed make the decisions.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, regardless of what happens, protecting the financial status and protecting clubs from going insolvent and just thinking about it from a people perspective is the only course of action that can be taken at the moment, really. But I guess that wraps us up for episode 1. Thanks for joining us, Draps.
Welcome.
If you've liked this episode, subscribe to the channel. Leave it. I'd love to hear a few comments. Give us some ideas of what we might want to, what you want us to cover over the next few episodes. Let us know what you think on today's discussion. And I will see you along with Draps, hopefully, for episode 2.